Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ground Zero Growth. I'm your host, Sam Sapp, owner of Lockbod. I'm joined today by Jim Starcev, just all around entrepreneur, program manager at KC Digital Drive, mentor, coach, and I think coffee shop consultant too in there.
Well, everybody's got to have a strange hobby. So, and mine's strange being that I don't drink coffee, but I'm a coffee shop consultant. So,
So let's start with KC Digital Drive. What are you guys doing over there? What is Jim doing specifically? What are you in right now?
yeah. So, for those of you who don't know, KC Digital Drive is a civic nonprofit. We've been around in the Kansas City area for about 12 years. I joined actually right now, right at 4 years ago. So I've been doing work with Digital Drive for about 4 years. Anniversary. I guess this month is my anniversary month.
Congrats.
So we have been in, we actually started in Kansas City after the Google Fiber announcement. So when Google Fiber picked Kansas City to be, their first market to launch the fiber service, the cities of Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas came together and said, "Hey, we would like to help stand up an organization that can make for sure there's an equitable distribution of this new asset that's coming to the city." So we got involved very early on in the whole digital equity and closing the digital divide and kind of the importance of that. Still cornerstone to what we do today. So we do a lot of work in that. But for us, that's also expanded. So digital equity is important, but just because someone can get on the internet doesn't mean we're really still full inclusive of all that means. So we've really been more leading down the road to digital transformation. So in an inclusive manner. So making for sure all of Kansas City can do that. But with that said, too, our digital equity work has really expanded. We've started doing a lot more work around both the full state of Missouri, full state of Kansas, and everything else with it. So I came in specifically. What's interesting for me is digital equity is not my main focus. So my main focus is on kind of our innovation and entrepreneurship. So I get to lead a bunch of different groups of people. We have a Web3 group. I have an AR/VR group. We have a digital media group. We've got a digital health group that we do. So I'm leading these different groups, and then I do a lot of work on what for us the program is our Solutions Lab Ventures, which is our entrepreneurship program. So I work with, as I said, over the last couple of years, worked with about 80 tech entrepreneurs, mostly really early stage people. So people are jumping in and say, "Hey, I have an idea. What do I need to do? How do I really start mapping this out? How do I build an MVP? How do I raise capital, et cetera?" So I do a lot of coaching on people that are in that kind of early stage of saying, "Hey, I want to be an entrepreneur. What do I need to do?"
Wow, that's really exciting. There's a lot there to dig into. But yeah, I absolutely love it. How I've been telling other people is it seems like you guys are kind of on a quest to make Kansas City kind of a tech capital. Is that safe
Yeah.
to say?
A digital leader. A digital leader is the
Yeah,
term that we use. Yeah.
I love it. So kind of tell me about what was your initial sort of upbringing, if we can kind of start on the journey of Jim
Yeah.
and what was kind of those first years up to high school and college look like.
Yeah, so interesting for me is but for those, in the Kansas City area, I ultimately ended up in Leawood. I had a successful business. I sold and all of that. But, I started, as I like to say, from much more humble beginning. So I grew up on the east side of Troost, with a single mother, worked in a factory, to do that. So that whole thing. I had three siblings. My father died when I was very young, with that. So there were times that we were on, public assistance and everything else. So definitely grew up really below the poverty level, for that. So it was, but with that said, I had a good upbringing. My mom loved and cared for me a lot. I had two older sisters in particular. My sisters were, they were half sisters actually, but they were 7 and 10 years older than me. And so a lot of times they did a lot of help with me for school and doing this so I could really get through the education. I do think that was a big you know savior for me in lots of ways. As I said, I did well in school, succeeded, got scholarship to go to college, so first in the family to go to college, graduated with the degree. Even though the ironic part for me was my degrees in secondary education chemistry. Even though I did not end up teaching, I went straight into that, into a career into financial services. So one of many pivots I've taken throughout my life and everything else. So got out of there and jumped as like the connection for that always seemed unusual for most people. To me, it seemed very logical. I mean, in lots of ways, financial services has a huge education component and it's a huge analytic component. So I had the education, I had the chemistry side of it to me. So even though I took no economics or business classes in college, I thought it prepared me well for what I ended up actually doing. So yeah, so as I said, had a happy childhood, but it was definitely, one that, you know, foreclosure of a house that we lived in at one point, of, moving
Mm.
around a little bit, of, not really having the things. Also inspired a strong work ethic. I used to say, I had a paper route when I was in high school. Most people think of that, you're on your bike and throwing papers around a block or two. By the time I'd hit college, I got married while I was in college. I bought our first house all off of the paper route. It was when the time that, the Kansas City Star and Times was a morning and afternoon paper. At the peak of that business. So talk about starting an entrepreneur. I had three different trucks and 11 people working for me to deliver to almost 2,000 homes. With it, had no idea what I was doing. If I would have been better, I could have been far more successful at, billing and getting new customers and doing some of the things that I learned later in the life. But for me, as I said, it was, I tell people I bought our first home. I was 20 when I bought our first home, and did that off of a paper route.
Mother though. I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm trying to, because I have the utmost, we've got a 3-year-old, and I have the utmost respect of single mothers after going through that first 6 months
Yeah,
to a year
yeah,
of infancy. Because me and my wife, I don't want to say we just barely made it through, but I don't know what worse looks like, because it was
oh,
definitely tough.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, it sounds like, yeah, that had to have been a tough
right.
battle to get, and to
Which is
get,
why I
but to
mentioned the
ins
older siblings too. I think older siblings helped. I mean, by the time I was, 5 or 6, my oldest sister was 16, stuff too.
okay.
So she could help and kind of contribute and do that. But yeah, but I'm with you. I've been married for 35 years. I have 4 kids. And, when I had 3 kids under 3, can't imagine anybody doing that alone, even though I know lots of people do.
Yeah. And the paper route, wow, wow. So that's a really interesting thing. What was the progression out of that? Because you had mentioned, had I understood more of what was doing,
Yeah.
was there kind of a
Well, it ended up
negative
being a
pro
dated possession. I can't imagine people are doing nearly as well because nobody gets paper delivery of papers anymore. So
No, I
it
mean,
was
I was
good.
gonna
But
say, whatever the transition, it was probably a fortunate one, because had you
yeah,
grown it too much
yeah.
further, then you'd have to figure out what it looks like to, like,
Mine was
I
a
think,
little forced. I mean, by the time I started college, they dropped the afternoon papers, made it well. So, it paid our way through college. But both my wife and I came out, as I said, had some scholarships, but neither one of us ended up with any loans. So we both got married, didn't have a lot of support from our family. None of our family paid for any of our college bills. So we actually worked and did that ourselves. But as much as I said, I've never needed a lot of sleep. So the paper route, I got up at 3 in the morning. So I worked from basically 3 to 6 in the morning, might take a couple hour naps, and then did college, did university all day. So everything else. The part for me that had to end was student teaching. When you actually do your student teaching, you had to be full time. They didn't want you working or doing anything else with it. So, and I figured at that point, as winding down, the student teaching is the last part, and then you finish and get out. So I actually got out of the paper route business to do my student teaching and finish up, my last semester of college.
can you kind of tell me about, but what is winding that down specifically? Because you had a couple people working with you. Was it
That's a
just
great
one of those
question.
things where,
By the time I'd ended, as I said, I'd already shifted down from 2 routes to one route. When I had the
gotcha?
3 trucks and that, so it was down to one, and it was one other college person. And it was funny.
Okay.
By the very end, our business looked a lot different. I literally had, if you want to talk about danger, how I survived. How did you survive your first job? we were down to a minivan instead of one of the big paper, because I at times I'd had the big paper trucks, this and this. Had one person sitting in back, rolling the papers and throwing them up. I had a stack of papers on my dash that I would grab and roll while I threw out both windows as we drove down the road to do this. Extremely dangerous. If one of my kids asked to do this today, I would not allow them to. How we never wrecked or killed myself, I don't know. It was because it was 365 days here too. That was if it was snowy out, if it was icy out, it was whatever. We were going down and doing this, and as I said, so me and one other college student kind of worked through, and then yeah, I just surrendered. It's one of those things you could actually sell routes, as I said. Knowing what I know today, I probably could have had a little bit better of an exit, but for me, we just wound it down, and I just turned the route back over to the Star, and they found someone else to do it.
There you go. Okay. So from routes to wow, and you take a chemistry degree into
Yeah,
financial planning,
yeah,
which
yeah,
I see the route now as you've connected the dots, I
right,
see it. But
right.
without the dots connected, is this something where they just kind of saw it or they were looking for folks and you just needed a degree and
Yeah, well, yes, I do. I mean, and it wasn't, Northwest. Like Northwest is a huge advocate. They recruit a whole lot out of college and everything else with that. Mine wasn't quite that, but for me, as I said, it was really interesting. I came out and, as I said, the surprise for me, I just thought I want to go into education. I want to do that. I tested out a couple things. Like I went to Missouri State and I was attorney. I actually did really well with that. I kind of tested out as an engineer type and all that. But I love the idea, as I said, and maybe it was because of how important I think education was to me and everything else. And doing that, I've always liked, working with other kids and kind of that mentoring aspect, which, as I said, I've found different ways to do that down the road with it. But it was funny. I had a couple high school teachers that said, you really don't want to be a teacher and all that. I'm like, well, what, when you're 18, you think you know everything. Like, oh, what do these old people know? What are they telling me and all that? Even though they were teachers and everything else with it. And then I got in, I did my student teaching, and the two teachers I worked there, like, you really don't want to go into it. And when you get into student teaching, you do start to see the politics of education that comes in and dealing with it and dealing with administration and you kind of have this in lots of ways what I think people do of entrepreneurship. You have this kind of glamorized version. Oh, I'm 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 that. I'm trying to think of the movie with Robin Wright. What's the name of the movie? He stands on the desk and yells.
oh yeah, yeah, with Robin Williams though,
Robin
Captain my
Williams,
Captain. Yeah,
Captain, my
yeah,
captain. Yeah,
yeah.
try to.
I don't I'm having a
Yeah,
visual here
it'll
so
come
we
to
could
both of us later, but it's that you glamorize that. You're the teaching, you're inspiring all these kids and
Dead
everything
Poets
else, and
Society.
yeah, Dead
Yeah,
Poet
yeah.
Society. There,
All
thank
right.
you. Yeah. So,
Sorry, keep going.
um, yeah, so you have that kind of glamorized view of what it is, but then if you really see the day to day and dealing with, parents and dealing with administrators and all that, I understood why they were saying maybe this isn't the best fit for you because I don't always, do well in some of that thing. So yeah, so you finish, and actually your student teaching finished a little bit before you even graduate and get your degree, a couple months. So and I always worked. I didn't have the paper out then, so took a job managing a little cafe. That was my first introduction to the coffee business, actually. But did this. I was kind of waiting and managing and do that, and it occurred to me, I made more money in the paper out than I'm going to be making teaching, and I'm making more money managing this little cafe than I would be teaching and stuff. It's like maybe I need to pivot a little bit. And I wasn't fully money motivated, but it was suddenly looking at especially the time, the salaries and all those people doing that.
One,
So I thought, well, what else could I do?
it's interesting to me too. The gentleman that kind of helps at my local fashion store. I met with him once over lunch, and he was a teacher. He'd been in Men's Warehouse for like uh 12 plus years, but he talked about the transition of teaching, and part of why he exited was, there was a period where the way he described it was the administration almost always backed you. So then it was you against like, this is my opinion on what your child is doing in school,
Right.
and that's on you to figure out as the parent. I'm just kind of a glorified babysitter, I think is the way he put it. But he's like, now it's like you really don't have any backing. It's you between the parents and the administration. And so I could see as to how um good job for those other teachers sending up the warning
Right. As I
flares.
say, I admire teachers. It's a profession that is definitely a calling, I think, and do that, and
Yeah.
they do a good job and everything else. And ultimately, I decided, well, maybe I'm not called. Now, with that said, I found other ways to do that. As I said, I got involved with youth ministry through the church. I was actually, that's actually how my wife and I met. We were doing youth ministry together at
Mm.
church, and so I've always taught Sunday school, taught this. So when as my kids got older, I coached a whole lot of sports, even though I wasn't great at sports of any of them. I coached soccer, basketball, and baseball at different points. So I probably ended up doing about, I don't know, it was probably about 20 total seasons of coaching. I did a mentorship program at our high school. So doing kind of one-on-one, working with people, got involved with like some urban ministries like Freedom Fire. So as I said, I think that calling was always in me. But
Yeah.
I found other ways. I decided professionally that's not what I want to do, but I can fulfill that calling in a lot of different ways.
No, that's so cool. Okay, so you brought it kind of in the initial, you brought it into the church with you ultimately in volunteer
Yeah,
roles and things like that. That's cool. Um, so okay, managing a coffee shop, you were saying,
right.
and
But I'm
you're
like, this
making
is
a
not
little
my
bit more
long-term
money there.
job. What should I
Yeah.
do? So I literally just started looking. And one of the things that I'm naturally very good at math. So it's like, well, that seems like that could be a normal jump into financial services and what you find out. So really just looking at, job postings and stuff, I'm like, oh, this might be interesting. So I ended up applying at this small company, which as I said, knew very little I was doing. And really what they were wanting to hire was a salesperson, which we're going to get into later. What makes me not a naturally very good salesperson, they just wanted someone that had contacts and could do this and everything else. So I took a position with this company called All America. So they were an insurer out of Boston, not Boston, Worcester, Massachusetts. So they had a local office in Kansas City, actually in the Independence area. And so went and did that and was not great at it. I was really good at the actual working with clients and doing this, but I also had bigger ambitions. They wanted people to sell insurance. I was much more into the stocks and financial side. So I got my Series 7 license while I was there, which they weren't thrilled with. I think they didn't. That's getting more that you could trade stocks. And like, why does anybody want to trade stocks? I'm like, that's kind of interesting to me. And then I actually got recruited by a local broker dealer. Because as we said, I was not very good at doing cold calls. So I hired a service to do cold calls to set up appointments. Once I actually got in front of somebody and talked to them that was really needed in that, I was really pretty good on that side. But one of my cold calling company that I use called the principal of a broker dealer, and he's like, "Yeah, I want to talk to him. Well, you want to talk to me to recruit." So he ended up recruiting, which ended up being, you talk about those fortuitous moments in life. So as I said, they called one of the principals. He ended up becoming a mentor for me for the next 10 years. I actually went to work for that company and he saw, and I was again selling, they hired, reps to work with them and that was more doing, but he's like, I think you would be better served if you really wanted to come into the home office and do work. And he ultimately was right on that. So I actually joined their home office, started in project management for different for mutual funds and variable annuities, and ultimately moved into their stock trading side. So I worked on the stock trading desk of it. And because they were a smaller company and I was one of the younger people, even though I never considered myself a technologist, they probably knew more about technology than anybody else. So when they rolled out a VPN, suddenly that became my realm to learn and figure out and start teaching some of the other reps to do that. So I ended up, the advantage for me ended up in the small company was I got to be a jack of all trades in the financial services industry and worked on a whole bunch of different, here's how we do a product line and do this, and here's how we support reps, and here's what a trading desk looks like, and worked on that. So I ended up spending about 7 years there, really just learning all, as I said, all because I'd never even heard of the company. My cold caller called one of the principals of it, and he said, "I want to talk to this guy." And from there, as I said,
Clarify, your cold caller was this was under the American Financial, I want to
yeah,
say,
yeah,
or
the All
okay,
America
wow, yeah,
Financial,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, okay.
So
And there's a lot to dig in there too. So I get I went on one hand now that I'm in the entrepreneurial role, I kind of get it, but on the same token, it's like they weren't happy with you getting the Series 7 because they were like, we've got a sales guy in a sales role.
right,
You switched around. We're gonna have to get another sales guy in the
yeah,
sales
yeah,
role.
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, 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 yeah. But
Well, they allowed me to do
which
it.
is
You have to be
super interesting
sponsored
because
to get a Series 7, right? Yeah.
right, right. Well, and how many other people are like, gosh, I wish they'd go out and get a Series 7, you know?
Right.
So interesting. Wow. So, okay. And then the cold called, and then he recruits you,
Yeah.
and it becomes
Yeah.
a mentor, kind of brings you in, and you just learn anything and everything. So you weren't
Right.
rolling out the VPN though. This was a scenario where it's like that the IT department or whoever is rolling out the VPN, and
You
you're
know,
just
there wasn't
like,
much of an IT department at that point. When I think I started at VSR, when by the time I left, I think we were close to 100 employees. But I think when I started, I was like employee 11 or employee 12, and there were no, as I said, I got the technology role by default, kind of. And so yeah, so I just had to learn and figure out. And that was before you could jump on YouTube and get an educator. I don't even remember how we figured out things. And obviously, we used an outside company to help pull that in and rolling this out. I think our clearing firm was offering, so I didn't have to develop the software, but I definitely had to learn it and then figure out how to teach it to everybody else in the company and all the reps using it. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's there's there's a lot there too. It's for as much as there is on Google and YouTube, and for sure that's a huge factor, especially in tech. It's always interesting to me. You still, whether it's with an emerging technology, just to give you credit, with emerging technology and stuff, we still have moments where it's like we're going to the manual and just like, page 100 and something is like, oh, there it is. Ha, it's staring right at us. Or it's
and you
the
definitely had to
proudest.
do that when there was no Go, because we're talking. This is now. I guess we haven't given any of the time frames. This was the '90s, so this for me. I graduated in college in '92, so this would have been from 93 to 2000 was when I was at VSR Financial, so in Kansas City.
Wow, yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow, and 100-person firm. Not so you and you got tech by default. Interesting.
Yeah.
We talk to some firms like that sometimes. It's fun and intriguing. Oftentimes it's kind of the office manager role that tends to get it, or HR. Um, so okay, this is cool, but you're soaking it all in. So you're taking it
I'm
all in.
soaking all in.
And then what was that transition from that one? Because it's and what was your final role? Were you CTO, CEO,
Oh
COO,
no, I had
just
no time. It was
general?
funny, you know. Yeah, I was. I don't even know what was on my business card at that point. As I said, I was working probably more in the trade desk than anything at this
Okay.
point, but I wasn't even the lead trade desk person. That so okay. So I'm there 7 years. Yeah, the transition, and by the time, as I said, I got married early. We by 2000, I adopted all four of my kids have been adopted. I adopted three kids in a matter of 18 months. So I went from zero
And you
to
adopted them all.
three kids. Adopted them all. Yeah, that's another podcast in and of itself. But yeah, so
Well,
adopted three
okay.
kids.
I'm sorry. I know it's another one in and of itself, but we just had the very last podcast was a gentleman that aged out of the foster care
Oh
system.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
am curious about talking about that on your because he aged out, right? So
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and he didn't go too much into the bleakness of it, but I kind of want to understand from both angles. What was that? Did you adopt locally? Because I've known people that
Yeah.
have said it is so hard to adopt locally that they go to other
Right.
countries to adopt.
Yeah, so it was interesting. My wife and I, as I said, and we both had loved kids and all that, and always said, yeah, I'd like to adopt at some point. We soon would have our own kids. We ended up never having our own kids. We went down the whole infertility path and that, and we were young since we'd got married young. You know, a lot of people that were adopting were older. We were in our late 20s. by that time, but was very committed to want to do it. And we did end up adopting internationally first. So I adopted two kids from Romania. This would have been in 1997. They were both right at 18 months. They were actually 6 weeks apart in age. Long story of that journey and everything else with it. And we thought, well, it's expensive. I mean, international adoption is expensive. We're in our 20s. My wife is a speech pathologist. So she was working as a speech pathologist in a hospital, and I was, working at VSR. So we were both, as I said, and we both come from, as I said, she definitely a working class family. Mine was, as I said, a little bit even,
Yeah,
below
yeah, yeah,
that.
yeah.
But we carved out kind of a nice middle class life. We both had, steady jobs and do that. And so we adopted two from Romania, which was an experience and stuff, and traveled over to Romania and did that. But when we did it, we thought we wanted to do two at one time, but we didn't end up finding a sibling group to do that because we're like, I don't know if we'll ever be able to afford to do this again and what will happen. So we made that adoption. And so it was great. It was a transition. And the kids, I mean, they were, my daughter at 18 months weighed 14 pounds and was not only not walking, she couldn't even stand, she couldn't even straighten one of her legs. She was really, really sick. I don't think she would have survived in the orphanage much longer before if we hadn't adopted her when we did, because she'd just gotten sick in the orphanage, and especially Romania in the 90s, there just wasn't good care for the kids. So we obviously had lots of, PT, OT, and speech for them when they came over. They didn't know English. They barely knew Romanian. They didn't know any English. So, but got them up really quick. So that was a full-time job in and of itself, really, with them. But then the crazy part for us was I had a daughter, not a daughter, I had a niece who went to school in Polo, Missouri, which is about an hour north of Kansas City. It's up by kind of Cameron. And she's like, hey, I've got a friend that got pregnant and she wants to adopt the baby. And I told her, well, my aunt and uncle just adopted. Maybe they would be interested. And, so to be honest, for us, like a lot of things, we said yes, knowing that there is almost no chance. I mean, teenage moms almost never go through with the adoption, but we're like, yeah, we'd like the experience of doing a baby and everything else. So we ended up working with this girl, and helped her through that and got the attorneys and do that. And as I said, another podcast, long story, that our domestic adoption ended up being almost more difficult than our international adoption. Had problems with the judge up in Caldwell County who didn't think private adoption should ever be allowed and had to move jurisdiction. And oh yeah, he thought all private adoptions were black market. He thought for some, and we were very above. I mean, we had two of the best adoption attorneys in the country or in the country, definitely in the state, in Missouri, working with us and all of that. But this judge would
Private
not.
adoption, you're referring to a scenario where two consenting
Yeah, it wasn't turned
parents.
over to the DFS. The child wasn't taken over by DFS, everything else. It's just that, yeah, this mother kind of approached us. We brought in the attorneys to do this adoption and everything else. And we did not pay the mom. We didn't do anything unethical. We were following all the rules and everything else. But this was a judge that just did not believe in private adoptions. So
See, now I'm
um,
super interested to bring in somebody from family services. I can't help but
yeah,
wonder if they would say, "Oh, please do more of that," or maybe not.
right.
I don't know.
I don't
I don't
know.
know.
Yeah. So
Um,
anyway, but so we adopt. So long story short, though, the mother, she wavered a couple times, but decided this was really what was best for our daughter, the Eliana, and that came. So we were there when Eliana was born in Chillicothe Hospital, and brought her home. And suddenly, as I said, went in from an 18-month period to we have no kids to we have three kids. So this is 99. So I decided the next year, why do I need a regular steady job? I should become an entrepreneur. It's not like my wife's at home taking care of our three young kids. Let me just jump off this cliff. So I would advise almost anybody, today looking back, I don't know why someone didn't really shake me hard. And I did have the mentor that as I said, shook me. I said, do you really want to do this? This is kind of crazy. But other than that, I didn't have a lot. My most of my family thought I was nuts because, as I said, blue collar, whatever. I have what they considered a great job, and so it's like, you're going to quit your job to do what? And at the time, startups were less common in 2000 than they are today. So it's like, it made no sense to anybody. Somehow in my mind it made sense, and my wife supported me on that, even though she shouldn't have. I mean, she could have had all sorts of reasons to do that. But yeah, so for us, when I looked at it, part of it was I felt like I'd maybe kind of capped out at where I was at, VSR Financial. There were as I said, dynamics of a business. There were like four partners, and the one had kind of mentored me. He didn't have kids. All three of the others had kids that were about my age that were in the business and looking at taking over. And I knew, I knew my path there was never there. I didn't really want to work for a big company. I'd had the experience. I didn't even go through my little real estate. I bought a couple triplexes that almost put me in bankruptcy. Did not know what I was doing in that business too. But there was that entrepreneur spirit, I think, always in me. So I'm looking at this, as I said, what really made the jump. I'm in this independent financial advisor chain. And most people at the time knew of the Merrill Lynch's and the Edward Jones and all of this, but there's all sorts of these kind of independent financial advisors. And I'm like, nobody's really serving them. There's no technology company that's helping them. There's not, because I did it. I worked with, the 200 brokers that we had and trying to help them of how do I set up my computer? How do I do this and that? And at the time, I was leading a small group at our church with a person who did have far more technology background and worked with big companies and all that. And I approached him and said, "Hey, look, I see this niche of market, and I think they really need help, and I think we could help them. What do you think of starting a business to do that?" So we got the how we were going to help them completely wrong, but we were right. As I said, I think what ultimately led success was we defined a target market that said, yes, here is a market. It's a market that's a fairly lucrative. It was a lot bigger of a market. There was these independent financial advisors all over the country that were doing okay, definitely needed some help to get tools that competed against the bigger ones to do that. So the one thing we did right was we identified a market that needed support. We didn't know how they needed support. And as we said, we probably did half a dozen pivots till we figured out what that was right. But so that was a jump. So I said, "Hey, what do you think of doing this?" And my wife kind of said, "Well, give it 6 months and see what happens and everything else." And we jumped off and as I said, it was rough. I heard someone last week describing entrepreneurship as driving in a dark tunnel and hoping that you're going towards the light. Most of the time, and especially the Attorney Journal, you don't even see the light. You have no idea if there ever is light. I've heard that description. If there is light, you don't know if it's a train that's going to run over you or if it's really that you're reaching out to the promised land. So, and that's how it felt like a lot. And her favorite saying that that she gave me the hardest time about for me was, I'm like, we're just about to turn the corner. We're just about to turn the corner. And I felt that for like 3 years as we hung on, that we scrapped and scraped. And we did, it was a true bootstrap startup. My partner and I put in $3,000 each. I didn't have, we lived pretty, fugally. I'd done that all along, but I had some savings, but not a ton of savings. So there was not much of a parachute. So we did whatever we could to generate revenue those first few years, whether it was building websites or doing a little consulting or helping people with their CRM system or whatever we had to do. Document imaging, we went through a phase there too. So anything that I could get someone to pay me a little bit of money so that I could, keep going the next day is what we really did for those first 2 or 3 years.
It's
And
cool
then
that
do you
you,
want to hesitate?
gosh,
Tell me when to stop or tell me when to,
no,
yeah.
no, no. I mean, what I like, I like the church involvement. I started kind of going back a couple years ago. Frankly, I had a moment, and I came back to Christ, started coming back to the Christian church, and it's been refreshing and different in that, before then, I don't know how much of a social network me and my wife had. Obviously, I had within my business and my clients and all that, and that was fantastic. But with regards to meeting people weekly, like you said, and there's some great people there, and it's fantastic to be able to lean on them in that way. It's super interesting to me. So you
Yeah.
jump in with your partner. Now I'm thinking back
Yeah.
on a I had a difficult partnership,
Right.
and I've talked to plenty of people that have. What was your partnership? Uh, can you get
Yeah.
specific on the split there? And
Right.
and
So it's,
how did that work?
yeah.
You knew each other before. Did the
Right.
church, you think, help with regards to, because I think most of the time, in my opinion, a lot of people don't realize it's another marriage. I mean, you're
Right.
splitting a bank account.
100%. Right. Yeah.
It doesn't get any more close, in my opinion, to another
Yeah.
marriage than splitting a bank account. And
Yeah.
I for me and my partner, there were some arguments for sure
Right.
that probably resembled those you might have with your partner. Knockout,
Yeah.
drag out. Never
I'll
got
tell you the
physical.
Yeah, I'll tell you the end of this. I'll spoil alert. So Mark, I started the business with 24 years ago. He and I just got back from Minneapolis, presenting together to the coffee shop industry and do that. So we have maintained both our friendship and our business partnership for 24 years, and through multiple businesses and some more successful
Wow.
businesses than others. But we were true 50-50 partners. We went in and said, hey, I brought the idea to him. I thought he had a level of expertise. We have some similarities. I think our worldviews lined up really well. And we knew that as we said, we were in a small group together. We led that small group together. So we knew each other. He had two kids that were, one of them was the same age as mine. One was a couple of years older. So our kids were very close. So we were very similar positions. We've both been married for about the same length. He's a few years older than me, not many. Don't tell him I said that, but just a couple of years older, but not too bad. So we started out as a 50-50 partner, and we have maintained that ever since. So we have now done, if you add it up, I think we've done 5 or 6 LLCs together, at some point, all of them as 50-50 partnerships. With it. Well, not true 50, a couple of them we raised them outside months. So at some point we were 43-43 partners, or et cetera, with that. But we were always the equal partners in everything we did.
If you were to try to distill it down to one trick, what would you say has kept that together like that?
As I do say, fundamentally, we both have the same worldview, and that really helped. I think our ultimate goals were really well aligned in what we wanted to do. We really wanted to, as we said, we came from a Christian worldview. We were very both dedicated and committed to our families and everything else. The job becoming the next billionaire was never our goal. Everything else, we just want to make a good living for ourselves and do that, and really serve our customers well and do that. So I think that was the foundation that did that. I think, on that practical level, especially as our company started growing and do this, you're never going to agree with her. I don't agree with my wife all the time, and everything else with that. I didn't agree with Mark all the time. So he and I would have disagreements and everything else with it. We were both pretty good, though. As I said, so one, our disagreements were always behind closed doors. We were always a unified front at our company. We never, none of our employees would ever know that we disagreed on something. If we had something that we weren't fully aligned on, we would hash it out behind closed doors, and then we would do a line front. We would never criticize the other, or we wouldn't say, well, yeah, we did that because it was Mark's stupid idea that we did this. I think we were also both pretty good about being forward looking. So I think a lot of times I've seen that with partnerships, it's really easy to second guess yourself, second guess your partner. If you're looking in the rearview mirror, you end up doing a lot of second guessing that can do this. We were both, well, it's like, okay, yeah, that was wrong. But and ultimately, as I said, because we always came at the end of the day, we both decided. It was never, that was may have been his kernel of the idea, but we both decided to do that. It was wrong. We're going to move on to the next thing, and never really focus and try to cast blame or do anything else with it, for whether that was the things that worked out really well for the credit, or things that worked out poorly to cast the blame. So, and do that. So we always try to stay unified and accept and do that. And we always had a veto. We kept a veto thing. If someone was passionately, thing that they did not want to do something, then we would allow either myself or him to make that decision and do that, and we would move on. That rarely happened. That we always gave ourselves that right to that. Hey, if just because it's a 50-50 vote, if you are really adamant that this is something you don't want to do or wrong, then you have the right to voice that, and we'll figure some other way to do it. So
I like the structure. Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, and it reminds me of Jeff Bezos with Amazon talked about a pretty easy. He's like, at a large company, we want to continue to allow ideas. He's like, and so typically how we exercise ideas is when it comes up, we will take a subset of customers and we'll deploy the idea to them. And the metric for success is, did it make more money? And if it did, then success. The idea was, if it not, then no problem. We just cut
Yeah.
it off and move on. And he did describe, to be fair to him in full context, he did describe scenarios where he's like, obviously making returns easy is not an idea that's going to immediately be profitable, but it's a long-term play. He's like, so sometimes there's exceptions based off of what we
Right.
think
Right. Yes. Right.
long-term is better
Yeah.
for customer success than short-term
Right.
just money. Um, that's cool though. So, wow, I like that. I don't know, just the structure and all that. He'd probably had he been married for a little while? It sounds like you'd
He
been married
had,
for a
yeah.
little
And
bit.
both of our
Okay.
wives knew each other well, so our wives could keep us both in check as well, too. Yeah.
Got it. Good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So it
No, they
really
were
just
good
sounds
friends, and
like
they're still good friends today too. All four of us are still, we'll still do a trip together. I think we're planning. We all went to New Orleans together this year. So yeah,
because I'm trying to kind of get the magic for people listening because
right,
I jumped into now it's cool. I feel a little bit better saying this because it's one thing I've noticed about a lot of the entrepreneurs is sometimes we jump first and think later.
right.
I
Yeah,
jumped
yeah.
into a partnership that didn't pan out so well. He hadn't been married, let alone for so long, and I don't think we didn't meet each other at the church. And, I don't know if my wife ever met his girlfriend. And so what I'm kind of hearing and what I think was probably a key part of the success is that shared social fabric that, your wife didn't know who you weren't going with, and same with his wife. And then on the same token, you guys met each other and it already had uh, some degree of a social life even before that.
Well, as I said, and obviously that worked for us, and I'm a firm believer.
Sure.
It doesn't mean
Well,
that's the
some
only
people
path
get
to
lucky.
work and
Right,
everything
right,
else.
right.
Right? Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
let's talk about the only path. So you're in a business. Tell me
Right.
about the sales elements that you did
Well, yeah, I was
there,
going to
and
say, do we
tell
want
me
to get into
about
the whole
we oh we
introvert side of it all?
we can't not get
Yeah,
into this
because
because
this is the right time to do this. Because I'll tell that once we started this business, that transition. So as you know, Sam and I have talked about before, and most people will challenge me today on it because they don't see it in me. But I test out as a very strong introvert, and I have growing up, there would be times I used to sneak off and climb up in a tree and read a book because I just needed alone time. I needed, that wind down time and do that. I still need that today. I've done a lot of behavior modification. At times I used to have social anxiety. I got past the social anxiety. I now, speak regularly and I do that. I come across most people see me more exhibiting traits of an extrovert than they do an introvert because as I said, lots of behavior modification onto the settings. But for me too, it was really hard for sales. As I said, when I went into as a financial advisor, I was never great at the sales side of it. Do this and did that. It's just not in my nature. I hate small talk as an introvert. Small talk is just horrible for me and everything else. So when we started this business, the assumption was that Mark had more sales experience than I did, was a little bit more in his natural character. He would probably be the sales side of it. Well, what we found out is, as I said, we had this very niche market. Well, I knew that niche market. I'd lived that niche market. I was a broker myself. As I said, I carried all the license. I was at that point, I'd not only got my Series 7, I was a Series 24, which is general principal, worked with a lot of brokers. I had clients. I still had a book of clients even when we started that business because I actually maintained that even when I went to work for the broker dealer. So, I worked with clients. I understood the challenges of doing and all of that. So what we found out was I was the one that needed to talk to our prospects. I was the one that had to jump in. So the sales role had to really fall to me just because it was more logical. I could have those conversations and do that and everything else. So I shifted into the sales role for that. I was the one that's having that. He ended up being a really, really good operations person and doing that. And he would do sales too. I mean, as I said, if you're an entrepreneur, everybody does everything. If you're in a small, small business, everybody does everything. So we crossed over, but his strength ended up really doing there, and I ended up having success on the sales side. But I wasn't having to do a lot of cold calling. I had kind of a network of people that I knew at this point, and once we helped them, they referred us. We got, as I said, we were fortunate to get quite a bit of press going and do this, and that press would lead that. So we didn't have to do a ton of outbound selling to succeed in that. We reached out to networks, we had referrals, and then we had people inbound coming to us. And once people were inbound, and I'm sitting having a conversation about what it is we do and why we do it, how we did, I was great at that piece of it. I mean, that was just really strong because it was a core belief. I'm not having to make the small talk and do this and everything else with it. We just jump in, kind of that technical sales role type thing, and that I could do well. That actually didn't bump up against my introversion and everything else with it, because I'm really just, I'm talking core about my product, my baby, and everything else with that. That was easy to do, and so that didn't kill me. Now conferences did. I mean, as an introvert, if you're an introvert and you ever do conferences, exhibiting and doing that, we did fine. We did that, but man, conferences, and to this day they still do. If I go spend a couple of days at a conference, I am just wiped out afterwards. I'm not the ones that go out. For me, for conferences, it was normally shutting down in my hotel room by 8 o'clock just to be able to recharge and stop. I'm not going out and doing a lot of the networking and stuff too, which is when a lot of sales happens and everything else too. That piece of it was never me, because if I didn't have that time to reset and re-energize and get my strength back up, I couldn't function the next day of doing the interactions that I needed. So a lot of it was, like I said, figuring out what I could and couldn't do as an introvert in that. And so
Well, and I think we talked about it's interesting. It resonates so much with me every time you talk about the small talk element. It's I don't know what it is about me because I don't think I quite test as an introvert, but I just have so many one-on-one conversations like this. If we go deep into the weeds of what makes up the fabric of our life and how we can learn from each other, that is like that brings
right.
me some degree of energy. But if we're gonna stop at I grew up at small town and oh by the way, the coffee at such and such is great. And
Right.
did you see the Chiefs game last night? Um, it it I applaud people that can do that. Let's put it that way because it
The
just
Chiefs I can still talk about. I enjoy talking about the
sure.
Chiefs.
Well, the Chiefs, yeah, 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 and the Royals, and sure,
All
but
the
I'm not
others.
much of a, believe it or not, I'm not a huge sports person, and it's I think if you get deep enough to your point into the
Right.
analytical, then probably yeah, sure, but
Yeah, yeah.
if we're
A lot
talking
of
about the
data, a
high
lot of
level
fun in the
stuff,
data. Right.
the
Yeah.
weather, there we go.
Right. Weather. There you
That's
go.
a better
There you go.
example. If we're gonna
Well,
stop at the
and
weather small talk in the
right.
elevator.
The sad part about and we talk about behavior modification, all of that, and why small talk is doing it. One of the
So you
profiles of
say behavioral modification. Was that a natural thing, or are you actually going to people like consultation
a natural
style?
thing.
Like,
I never
okay,
went, yeah, as I said, when you do that, of how, what
you're
do I
just
need to
making
do?
tweaks as
Yeah, and this
you're
and this
aware.
and
Okay.
everything else. Like for me, one, and I'll say this, as I said, it really took some work because it was, it's not my favorite part of my profile, but you do the profile, you're an introvert and this and this. I'm very analytical, I'm very logical, think through that. But one of the things that it came out, and the big one I'm a fan of is culture index. It was the one that probably derived the most out of that we did. But it also said that I will talk to people if there's something I can get out of it. That's why small talk doesn't do it. It's like if there's something to do that. The behavior modification, I think, on my side is I've really been working hard to say, all right, I'll engage in that conversation at one of two things is I can get something from them, or if there's something I can give back to them. So I made that more of a two-way street to say, okay, the small talk, if it's meaningless, not going anywhere, I'm never going to get past that. But I don't have to just always be thinking of what can I get from that person. I can also really be thinking of what can I give to them and what can I give back to them, and how can we have that two-way, really sharing of that experience and that too. So I've really worked hard on that. And as I said, and it's but well, as I said, I love coaching and I love mentoring and I love that part of it too. So I really had to start more thinking that because I hated that part of my profile. It's like I don't want to be just out of I'm meeting with somebody. It's like what can I get out of them? What is that benefit? So I've tried to work that on both sides, even though there's still that natural tendency of always evaluate something. It's like, yeah, because I can sit alone. As I said, as a part of the introvert, I can be in a group of 100 and everybody else is engaged in talking. And if I'm sitting alone, it doesn't bother me, which is strange. I know that feels weird and everything else. But I'm like, probably should be engaged in a conversation with somebody. But if I don't think there's any, beneficial two-way conversations to have, then I don't have any conversations. So,
That's cool. Yeah, no, I've had to do a similar thing. When I came out of the partnership, I was naturally hesitant, and so how I'd kind of addressed relationships from then on out, even towards like prospects and clients, was you've got to make that first step. Now, once they made that first step, I would try to give back in excess of what I received, or as much as physically possible. I felt kind of indebted. But it, you know, and and actually, believe it or not, I'm not a huge fan of the organization per se, but I gotta give a shout out to BNI, just givers gain, just as that solidity of a tenant labeled what I was working toward, which was the notion of like, what happens if I just give? And to credit to people before me too, I found people my out of the partnership was people were, and I apologize, I'm borrowing for the mic for just a second, but people were people were giving to me that I could never reciprocate back towards. So I kind of adopted an internal motto of if you can't pay it back, pay it forward.
right.
Um, and it's interesting too because I actually was talking. I can't remember the context fully, but I was talking that the other day. Somebody was talking about what maybe they need. Oh, I think I remember what it was, being in like a reciprocal referral group, which is important that they leads or referrals need to flow both ways. Perfect world. But there's scenarios where for one reason or another, the person will never be able to give back even if they want to. Just it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't work
Right.
out
Right.
that way. And so I told him, I got to give him the opportunity of like, maybe you're creating another me, maybe in that if
Right.
that person can't give back to you, hopefully they're giving back to someone
To
else.
someone else. 100%. Yeah.
And not that the world needs another me, no, but more that I hope that there's more people out there giving to your end that aren't
Yeah.
necessarily expecting to give back, because there's going to be at least a percentage of those that are going to wake up and realize, ah, I need to give back
Yeah.
now to the next person. And I think there are a lot of those because there's plenty of people out there willing to mentor if you're willing to show up and say, hey,
Yeah.
I'm
Yes,
going
they
to do
are.
my darndest to make sure your advice isn't falling
Right.
on wasted years.
And I've had a lot. As I said, I've had half a dozen people I would consider really strong mentors to me at different times, and do that and do that. And as I said, and hopefully I have given that back because now I've had the opportunity to mentor and with a lot of people and do that too. So yeah,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
so that's part of the introvert on the sales. The other side, I guess, to mention too is, a lot of people, as I said, kind of I think confuse introversion and social anxiety, even though a lot of times they do go hand in hand with each other. And there's been times that I struggled with social anxiety and insecurity and everything else with that comes across. A lot of people are surprised when you speak because I now do quite a bit of speaking and I've spoken in front of larger groups and stuff like, how can you be an introvert and do that
Well, the
and do
news loved you at one point, right? You were saying within that organization and the partnership, you were saying there was an element where you were on the news a few times, even,
We were, yeah, yeah, we
which I
broke in.
feel like is the peak of like, that's not an introvert up there.
Yeah, well, yeah, and obviously the news did, but and a lot of the news was press though too. As I said, we got interviewed a lot and quoted a lot, and then that led to speaking time. So, and I remember one of and I'd spoken a little bit, but early on, I spoke. I got invited to speak at the Charles Schwab National Conference and stuff. So I was one of the speakers, which made it was I think the not that she wasn't probably proud of me other times. My mother-in-law just passed away about a year ago, but she was so excited for that moment because she was a huge Democrat, a really big Bill Clinton fan, and Bill Clinton was the keynote speaker at that conference. So I had a program that had Bill Clinton on the top and then me down, in the really, really fine quality magnifying glass to see, Jim
You're
Starcev being on the
being
speaker.
modest, aren't
But
you? You were
but no,
probably,
I was way way down. But she was so excited to have a program that had Bill Clinton on the top, and then her son-in-law is one of the speakers alongside with that. But I remember that one too though, because it was probably 200-300 people, and you're talking and doing this, and I was nervous, I was anxious, I had the true butterflies. I felt like I could barely speak the first few minutes and stuff, and I finished that up and everything else. And as I thought, I did horrible. I did terrible. And I asked him, like, oh, you were great. You did a great job and all of that. So I suddenly started realizing that a lot of my insecurities were just my insecurities and go on and do that. And I've spoken, as I said, I've been I've spoken probably 40 or 50 times this year alone, and hundreds of times, and the crowd's as big as, I think, my biggest crowd. I spoke at I was one of the keynote speakers at the Mass Mutual conference, so that was like 1,500 people at that when we were on there too. So I got past it. But with that said, anxiety still comes across a little bit. I will not watch myself, like, recorded sessions and all this. So I'm Sam, I hate to disappoint you too. I will not watch this podcast. I cannot
okay.
listen to the podcast. I do not like to hear myself speak at webinars. My partner would send me webinars to say, hey, what can we learn drive? And I'm like, you are just tearing me apart, forcing me to watch myself do that. So I still to this date never watch any of my talks or listen to
Mm.
them or do anything else with them. So because I just would tear myself apart. I would be extremely um, critical of myself. So I just have given myself the pass. I'm like, I'll let other people watch and judge me, but I won't do it myself. So
Wow. Okay. That's super interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you probably never read a lot of the comments then either necessarily. Any
I'll
news
read comments.
articles or opinion? You'll read
Comments,
comments?
I will jump in. Yeah.
Okay,
But
interesting. I
even
was just
sometimes those, yes or no. Like I usually more often than not, I don't read them, but every now and then I will jump into the comments. I don't take them personally. The comments are
oh
funny as
wow.
like people that will say I do bad. I tend to appreciate more because if I was the one doing it, I would probably be making negative comments. I'm like, it's okay. I'm good at that. It
Huh.
doesn't hurt me at all. So I almost like the negative comments more than the positive ones. I'm kind of intrigued by them. So.
Interesting. Okay. Huh. Almost like interesting. You have a I like that angle almost. Almost maybe like somebody that's trying purposely trying to like hold you accountable maybe.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Okay. So, what was your progression in the KC Digital Drive? How'd you get out of that big partnership we were
Yeah.
talking about
Well, so
that,
we didn't finish up,
and you did
so
a
the long story
few.
short, we did finally find the product that, that company that I started, there was Intelligent Consulting. We really
Okay.
found the product fit. We developed this portfolio reporting solution that was on the cloud, had to sell the cloud and do that. And ultimately, as I said,
Now,
we,
how
I
did
took,
you talked about this, and I liked how you
yeah,
talked about it. So if you can hit it again,
yeah.
if not, I remember what you
Oh,
said because it hit me. How did you nail down that core service, that niche, if you will?
yeah. So as I said, we were doing a whole bunch of different things to pay the bills, as I said, just to survive. And one of the things we'd started doing, we did a lot of work with CRM software. And what we did, we decided we weren't building anything at that point. We weren't building our own software to do this. I had a document imaging solution that I partnered with to do. We had the CRM software that was a very industry specific one. So we learned it. So we helped people train. So it was almost a VAR relationship, even though these softwares didn't even have that. They're like, oh, well, if you want to help us. So we would sell their software, and then we would do the implementation, and then we would do the training of it. And so we were doing that for a bunch of things, including portfolio reporting software.
If
Yep.
I can help with context for anybody that doesn't know, CRM, client relationship manager, it's
Yep.
essentially, long story short, everybody has one. It's the tool that you're dumping all your client
Right.
relevant information in a way that comes back in a readable and relevant fashion. And VAR is value added reseller. So
Thank you.
Jim's
Yep.
saying there was a particular vendor that did this really, really well for the financial sector. Jim and his folks learned it to the extent that they could build it up
Yep.
for customers, in a way that was better than them just buying it and learning all the mistakes the hard way.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for those clarifications. Get my acronyms out of the way. So,
You're good.
um,
Yeah. Oh, we love those in tech,
yeah.
don't we? I'm just trying to
Yeah.
for
But the
everybody.
last one then was this portfolio reporting piece, which the portfolio reporting for the financial advisor was interesting because it was probably the most business critical. In the sense that it's what produced the statements that they gave to their clients to say, hey, here's how we're performing, this is how we're doing all this. But it's also what allowed them to bill their clients. Because at this point, we were working with mostly non-commission based financial advisors, so the registered investment advisor area. And so they had to bill
Okay.
their customers and do that. So there was a desktop software we really liked. We were doing a ton of work, which ironically enough was owned through a subsidiary by Charles Schwab. So Charles Schwab had bought the software company long ago. So we were using a Charles Schwab product to do this, and we started working, and it was a desktop software, and we were training people and do that, and that moment that happened for us was we had two clients like this all happened within about a month period. We had two clients that we had trained some of their staff on using the software, and that staff had left. So they came to us and said, well, we need you to train somebody new again. But it's like, why don't you guys just take this over for us? And everything else. We're like, well, we don't want to. And there were a couple of people that did that. There were some outsourcers. There were about half a dozen that would go in. They would either use a VPN and tunnel into the people's software and do the work and have it, or they would take their whole database, they would ship it, basically upload it overnight, do the work, and then send it back in to their. Both of them were horrible models, not really scalable. But when they approached us at the same time, this software rolled out webhooks, and nobody knew what webhooks. I didn't know what webhooks was at the time, and everything else with it. But I'm like, oh, these webhooks. I wonder if we could actually use those to create the reports that we're doing, and we actually manage this in house at our own place. It's never in their office. We're not tunneling into their office. We're not shipping databases back and forth and stuff. It's like, I think we can do this. The funny, back to the CRM, the person that had developed the CRM system we knew really well, he was a great developer. We approached him and said, you think you could write this for us? And I think even in, this is 2003 now, I think we paid him $5,000 to write this first level of code to generate this, which was a bargain even then. And I mean, he could have probably charged us 10 times that amount to do it, but he wanted to help us out and do that. He said, yeah, I like this idea. So we developed this, we rolled it out for a few customers. That those two customers that approached us that want us to do it, like, okay, we'll take it over, we'll do it, you can run this. That got us into really starting to build our own custom reports, setting up a database to start housing this. So we, as we said, we became a cloud service provider when people weren't doing it, and it was a hard sell. As we tell people, now today it's hard to imagine doing this, but we'd go and say, hey, you don't have to worry, we do all the backups for you. And they're like, well, what happens when the internet goes down and this, and the things that were the early age of that on front, we had to address and deal and convince these people that, yeah, we can do this. So we did, and as we said, and the company really went straight up. I think it was my partner and I think we had 3 employees at that point, and we went over the next 4 years. We grew to, as I said, almost 50 employees before we were acquired. But the funny thing was, though, as we launched that, Schwab decided themselves, that software is like, well, we're going to do this ourselves. So literally, I'm like 3 or 4 people in, and probably 4 or 5 months into the service, Schwab makes the announcement that they're going to start offering this service, that they're going to build it, and they do it. And the funny thing was, they over-engineered it, and it was extremely expensive. And they ran it for like 6 months, a pilot with 10 different companies, and said, we don't think we're going to do this, and we're just going to let the other outsources that are out there. And they shut it down, and we ended up getting, I think, 7 of the 10 clients came to us, and I mean, straight up from that line. 4 years later was when Schwab came back to us and said, hey, we really think this is the right business we want to be in, and everything else, we don't want to try to build it again. Would like to acquire you guys. And so that's how we ended up. So Schwab approached us. We didn't approach them. We weren't listed for sale. We had no intentions to sell, but they came to us. We also knew that they were a strategic partner for us, and everything else, that if there was ever going to be a buyer, they would be the best buyer for us. So when they approached us, even though it's kind of, as I said, exiting a business is great. I mean, as we said, it gave us lots of benefits and everything else with that. But it's still hard. I mean, your business is your baby and everything else with it too. So we had to really think through, do we want to do this? Is the right time? Or really we saw a path that we were going to continue to grow, but we also knew, yeah, this will always be our strategic partner. If they don't buy us, they may buy somebody else, and then they may never come back as a buyer. So this is the right decision to do. So we sold, started a couple other businesses all over the board, and yeah, so I started to, we decided we had a long non-compete. You want to go into the whole things of, so you got some questions. I know.
Well, I want to go from 5 to 50 in 4 years. That's what I
Oh
want to
yeah.
talk about because I mean, that's kind of like the ideal rocket. But then on the same token, I don't think people that haven't been in the position really fully to realize like the growth pains
Oh,
involved
tough.
in
Right.
adding, and we think 5 to 50 in 4 years.
Right.
I'm just doing quick math. Linear,
Yeah.
that's 10 people, right? Hold up here. A little over 10 people added per year. That's
Right.
assuming linearly, and they're not just
Right. And
30
obviously
of
some
them
people
in
left
the
and we
last
hired more.
year,
Right.
right? 100%.
Yeah.
So what can you help me kind of navigate that here? And also,
Yeah.
we should probably ask at this point, are you okay to go a little bit long here? Because we're bumping up against that
Yeah.
overflow period even,
A
and
little
I'm
bit. I'm
really
supposed to be
enjoying
on
the
another call, but
conversation.
I can probably juggle it for a little bit to run
Well, then
late.
we'll try and condense this a little bit here if we
Yeah.
can. But
Um,
so tell me about some of those
yeah.
growing pains right quick
Well, we were
then, and
just
then
talking about that at one of the workshops I did of that, going through that hiring, because to be honest, too, we still hadn't really figured out our pricing right. We were having to build our own data center and do that. My costs were outrageous. I did not have. We were underpaying in the market. We will be the first one to tell you. We could not compete with the other financial services. State Street was in Kansas City, DST is based in Kansas City. They offered better salary, better benefits, and everything else. And yet I still needed to be constantly hiring and pulling in people. We ended up hiring lots of young people, lots of people first times out of college to come in and do that. But the crazy thing is now we launched all sorts of people in this industry. I'm looking around at people that started at Intelligent that are now, CFOs at this and leading their own shop, and a couple of them have started their own businesses. And so all sorts of things that really came out. So we ended up being better at hiring. And I thought we were pretty good at finding people. We were really good at developing people. The pitch was, as I said, for us is, startups was kind of, we were a different culture. You come in, it's especially in financial services, it was, you don't have to wear a tie. We had, a air hockey table and a basketball thing, and the thing we went out to movies. We did, it was an escape from laser tag. We would do whatever. We had a lot of fun and enjoyed it. But the biggest, I think, the selling point we did is like, we'll help you build your resume. If you start a stage, you're going to work in a cube and do this. I'm like, we promote. We don't care about seniority, whatever. You can be 24 as 6 months, and if you're a rock star, we'll move you up and we'll put you in charge of people, which we did. And so we really, the biggest thing we were saying is, we will help your career more than if you're kind of at somewhere else. And we did. And a lot of them went on to have good careers with Schwab and different things too. But yeah, managing that and doing it, and it's hard and it's very different. Your role as an owner changes, because then I was more into managing people than managing our clients or products. I mean, I get at some point, like the last year, I ended up traveling a lot because I suddenly realized I don't, when we were at, 5 employees, and, Julie and I had, 10, 20 customers, even 34, I knew all my customers and I knew their family and knew this. And if there's ever an issue, they need to call. And suddenly I'm looking one day, I'm like, someone was bringing up somebody. I'm like, I don't know who that customer is. I mean, it's not only that I don't know anything about them, like, when did we sign them up as a customer? And what do we do with them? And this and this. And I suddenly was realizing I'm disconnected from that, which is unusual for an owner. So yeah, going through that growth period, we suddenly had to hire HR consultants, and we had to figure out benefits and how are we offering medical insurance, and all sorts of things that we didn't have to do when we were at 5 employees. We had to do when we were at 20 and 25 and 30 and 40. And always had to hire. And fortunately, as I said, we hired some really good. I had a great COO who did a really good job of hiring and developing and bringing in. We were pretty good about, as we said, that hire slow and fire fast. I mean, we were, when people didn't work out, we learned that was hard for me too. I got much better about letting people go, but it's like, if people aren't working, at the end of the day, as I said, they're not good for them. It's not good for us. It's, they need to find something that is right for them. So we got better, but you have to learn how to fire people and you have to learn how to hire people and you have to all of that. So it was learning. We were, as I said, I had a lot of mentors. By that point, we were heavily involved with Vistage. So I had a coach through there, my partner and I, who was phenomenal. He was a retired lieutenant general in the Air Force and a former CEO of a Fortune 50 company. So who was our business and helped us through all sorts of things and connected us with resources. I had a HR consultant that we found in Minnesota. I had an attorney who specialized on small companies working with large companies. So like when I cut my deal with Mass Mutual, she's the one that helped negotiate that when we sold to that. So I ended up with this network of professional resources around the country through that I could tap into to say, hey, help me. I don't know what I'm doing here. Help me. So, but yeah, that growth period was it was fun. I mean, we had to move offices 3 times and do this to grow and expand. And I mean, all in short periods. One, we moved the legendary story of that, we moved across the street. We're like, well, we're not hiring a moving company to move across the street. So we literally had everybody load their computer up on their office desk and roll it across the parking lot to the other building to do that. We used to make our employees, we had these glass setup desks. One of our first tasks for an employee was you had to set up your own desk. It was literally in a box. We want to make sure people are willing to roll. It's like someone's like, I'm too good to do that. So I'm like, well, you're probably not the right fit um, for us to do that. So people put together their own desk and got settled in and do that. So yeah, so we learned a lot. We made, as we said, made a ton. We didn't go through it and say we made a ton of mistakes, and there were things that we did wrong and everything else with it. But we did get a few things right, and really hiring and developing a team, because you have to grow at that rate. You have to have a lot of really, really good people around you, a lot of good employees, a lot of good mentors and advisors in the network to do that. And we were fortunate to really have that.
Wow. Yeah. That is exciting. And then Charles Schwab approaches you. You guys make the
Yep.
decision
Yep.
and dot 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 KC Digital Drive.
Yeah. So, obviously once you sell, that is a tough, as I said, we've got all sorts of podcasts lined up. Working for the company that acquired you was hard. We did a 4-year agreement. We actually ended up ending that after 11 months because there was a financial crisis that happened in 2008, and Schwab said, I think we've got enough out of it. So that was good. Started a couple other businesses. Ultimately, one, we opened some gelato shops, which is how we got in the coffee business. We mostly because we want to learn retail data analytics. We started a retail data analytic company. That one still exists today, but we just never got the traction or had the success there. Helped an employee start a business. So came in as kind of a minority partner, but helped him really do that and everything else. And then I went through a bit of health issues. So I had cancer 4 years ago, which really took me out. I went through 6 months of chemotherapy and everything else. And at the end of the day, my wife's like, because we were about to start, I was in EIR at a bank program, but both my partner and I, we were looking at starting a new fintech company right before this happened. And thought, I don't know that I want to go through that again and everything else. And said, well, maybe it is time for a life pivot. And so that life pivot for me was looking at, maybe I want to get back into the nonprofit world and do that. And didn't know a ton about Casey Digital Drive when I met. I met with the person that founded this. He and I sat down and had coffee and talked about it. And he kind of talked about his vision of really, making Kansas City a digital leader and kind of the innovation and the entrepreneurship. For me, that just resonated in all sorts of things that, I love innovation. I love, to this day, I love playing with different technologies and putting a headset on and learning about AI and getting into doing a blockchain course right now. So I love different technologies. And then, as I said, going back to why I went to school to become a teacher was I love coaching and mentoring and working with people. And so the opportunity to do that on really more of a larger scale than I ever have was great. So now that I get to sit, I spend so much of my week now just meeting one-on-one with entrepreneurs and talking to them and being, as I said, that combination coach, mentor, therapist to work them through. So for me, it was the cancer was probably that pivot point. I hoped I would have pivoted, even if that wouldn't have happened. I think I would have eventually pivoted here anyway, but that was definitely the catalyst for me to make that happen.
And to clarify, you got through that, right?
I think well, yeah. I'm in full in remission. Yeah, so I go back and forth.
Congratulations.
They thought it might have come back on me this year earlier. I went through a couple month period where it looked like that, but it did not. So yes, I'm healthy today, and I'm in good shape and getting to continue just to work with people.
Quite the story. So, as we start to wrap up, is there anything kind of parting words you want to leave with folks thinking back on your story? Any kind of like key elements, if you were to distill down to kind of one thing or two things that you think kind of sparked who you are and might spark that next
Yeah.
person?
I think part of it, and I've talked about this not only, in entrepreneurship, I talked about the cancer, everything else. Everybody's journey is unique. And I think what's interesting is what worked for me may or may not work for somebody else. And what worked for somebody else probably wouldn't have worked for me and everything too. But with that said, you can always learn from other people. And so for me, I've always been a lifetime learner and wanting to, see what other people are doing and how I can do that. And then figure out how can I apply, as I said, and sometimes I see, oh, they did a great job, but that was never me. It would have never worked for me and everything else. Or, what can I really pick up from that? So I think being a lifetime learner, and having people around you that can really help. But then at the end of the day, knowing you still have to take it all in and you have to figure out what is right for your path, whether, as I said, whether that's life, whether that's business, what that is that it is really ultimately on you and figuring out all those pieces. So take all the advice you can get and then figure out what advice that you really need to. So, and then don't question yourself. As I said, I could look back on my life. As I said, there was all sorts of people that gave me advice that I probably should have listened to that I didn't. But for me, it's always been about moving forward. So if I spend time, you want to learn from your history, but if you get caught in your history and you second guess your history and everything else with it, I think it prevents you from moving forward. And I think we should always be moving forward. Even as I get into the older part of my life, I'm still moving forward and I'm always on what is next and where can I go from here.
So, how can people connect with Jim and with KC Digital Drive?
Yep. So our website, obviously is the easiest place to find us. It's kcdigitaldrive.org. And with it, my email is that it's Jim Starcev at kcdigitaldrive.org. With it, I'm obviously on LinkedIn. I have a very unusual last name, Starcev, which, is Starcev. Is a Serbian name. There's not a lot of that in the US. So I'm really easy. LinkedIn is probably the best way to track me down.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jim, for being on. I've really
Thank you,
appreciated having you.
Sam. Enjoyed it a lot. So appreciate it. And as I said, I'm hoping others enjoy this podcast because I won't personally. So
It's fair.
I'll listen to your other podcast. I won't listen to this one. So
Perfect. Have a good one, y'all.
all right.
Hello, everybody. I wanted to thank you for listening to today's episode. It's such a blessing to be able to interview some such fantastic individuals. If you're interested in listening to more, we look to post every Thursday at 10 a.m. You can find us on YouTube, Amazon Music, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Thanks so much. Have a blessed day.